There is a hand-drawn image of Jesus Christ on the wall. Next to it are marks for counting the days. Iron mugs used by prisoners lay on the floor. These rooms comprised one of the largest Russian torture chambers in northern Ukraine, where civilians were illegally held.
I could feel how they were attaching wires to me. They poured water on me from a bottle, and I realized they were administering an electrical current to me.
I thought my eyes were going to pop out. That's the feeling I had during the first few minutes, while I was still conscious, that my eyes were spinning like this.
The electrical current was strong. My whole body was twitching, along with my teeth and everything else. I wasn't even having it the worst. Other people were worse off.
These are the premises of the former aggregate plant in Vovchansk, Kharkiv Oblast. Russian forces turned it into an illegal prison for civilians. During 6 months of occupation, several hundred people passed through this torture chamber. But it is striking not only in its size, but also in the scale of torture conducted there.
This included physical beatings, mock executions, electric shock torture, sexual violence, rape, and many other kinds of physical violence that were used here.
The torture chamber at the local plant was exposed by the Ukrainian military after the liberation of Kharkiv Oblast in the fall of 2022. Now Vovchansk is completely destroyed after Russian troops tried to retake Kharkiv Oblast. The premises of the torture chamber at the plant were also damaged. However, we managed to visit the town shortly before the start of a new Russian offensive and record valuable testimonies from survivors. Although they only agreed to speak anonymously, fearing a reoccupation of the region and even greater terror from Russian soldiers.
Все хорошо видно.
The town of Vovchansk is located a few kilometers from the Russian border. In February 2022, the town was one of the first to be occupied. The local occupation authorities consisted mainly of representatives of the so-called Luhansk People's Republic, another occupied region of Ukraine which has been under Russian control since 2014. The persecution of civilians in Vovchansk began almost immediately. One woman was detained in one of the first weeks of the occupation.
A man comes up to me, an old man, and says to me, "What has Ukraine ever done for you? You'll rot here with your broom." I said, "You're retired already. You live here. If something doesn't suit you, well, Russia is open. There's the flag." In short, I told him to bug off. I got home, put my bike away, went into the kitchen, and that's it. They followed me home.
Natalia was taken to the aggregate plant, the largest enterprise in the town. She was kept in one of the rooms near the entrance, but the torture chamber was not yet operating at the scale we would learn about later. In that same room, the woman was interrogated and tortured.
They put 2 pins in my ears, then they gave me an electric shock. That's when I realized what it was. Well, the first time my hands weren't tied. I thought my eyes were going to pop out. That's the feeling I had during the first few minutes, while I was still conscious, that my eyes were spinning like this.
Natalia was released after a few days, but some of the detainees were held in the torture chamber for months. In May 2022, the torture chamber at the local plant became known throughout the town and beyond. The Russian military was already using 3 of the plant's buildings to hold locals. Torture and kidnapping became systemic. It is then that 2 other locals, who agreed to speak anonymously with the Kyiv independent team, were illegally detained.
They took me there. put me on a chair, and I felt how they started tying wires to me. It was clear to me they were going to electrocute me. I said jokingly, I've been teaching electrical engineering all my life. I'll have to learn the theory and practice now. They laughed a little and went on with it.
Alexander is a lecturer at a Ukrainian university. He came to Vovchansk at the beginning of the full-scale invasion to take care of his parents. During the occupation, he helped the locals evacuate to Ukrainian-controlled territory. He was detained for his pro-Ukrainian stance, which he did not hide.
The electrical current was strong. My whole body was twitching. Along with my teeth and everything else, I wasn't even having it the worst. Other people were worse off. They only stuck the electrode in my fingers and nails, while others could get it attached to their mouths, ears, penises, and anuses.
The man was held at the plant for 3 months. The guards changed every few weeks, and each new rotation conducted their own interrogations and torture.
Another 2 weeks passed, then 2 more, and it starts all over again. And again, the same interrogations.
People ended up in the plant's torture chamber, mainly for their pro-Ukrainian views, after being denounced by acquaintances or because of a minor conflict with the Russian military. Valentin, a local official, was being held in the plant's torture chamber at the same time as Alexander. The Russian military detained him for allegedly collaborating with Ukraine's intelligence services. During interrogations, he was also asked for information about other locals who had a pro-Ukrainian stance.
They demanded that I tell them where I lived or who worked where. Of course, I refused.
You refused?
I refused.
How did they react?
Well, their response was aggressive. They physically assaulted me right there on the second floor next to the entrance.
In addition to interrogations, illegally detained Ukrainians were forced to take a so-called lie detector test, a polygraph. For this, they were taken to Shepekino, the nearest town in Russia. The university lecturer managed to pass, but the polygraph results of the local official Valentin did not please the Russian military. The man was tortured with particular cruelty.
They tortured me. They forced me to kneel against the wall, and I wasn't allowed to lower my bottom. They took me to some kind of basement where there was water, ankle deep. They told me to tell them everything. I said, "What can I tell you?" I had nothing to tell them. I could feel how they were attaching wires to me. They poured water on me from a bottle, and I realized they were administering an electrical current to me.
In the summer of 2022, the torture chamber became overcrowded with illegally detained civilians. Each of the 3 rooms held approximately 40 people. Some of them were forbidden to leave the confines of their makeshift cells.
People slept everywhere. There was no room to walk. We even laid under the lower shelves, all the way on the ground. We cleaned up in there, wiped up, so as not to breathe in dust.
In order to not get lost in time, people leave marks on the wall every day. Someone draws flowers and images of saints. All the walls are covered with drawings. People are afraid to communicate with each other.
It's understandable that people were silent because of the stress. Though we tried to support everyone, we'd offer some water, some candy, some sugar, or some food, so that the person would eat, so that they would understand that they were not completely alone.
People are also silent because agents are put in the cells with the illegally imprisoned people. One of them is a local collaborator, Dmytro Churinov, nicknamed Chiz. In Vovchansk, he was known as the local crime boss. At the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Dmytro Churinov chose to collaborate with the Russians.
He was a cell supervisor at the time. He would receive you in the cell, he assigned a place where you could sleep, lie down, and so on.
People held in the torture chamber are divided into two categories. The first are those detained for so-called minor offenses. They are interrogated mainly by collaborators from other occupied territories.
Anyone who violated the curfew was made to work in the canteen or to build bomb shelters. Someone could be sweeping in the yard, someone could be unloading something. That was their attitude towards us.
Those who the Russians suspected of collaborating with the Ukrainian side were interrogated by FSB officers. Most of the victims the Kyiv independent team spoke with described being subjected to electric shocks and beatings during interrogations. However, Ukrainian human rights activists have also documented cases of detainees having their nails pulled out and of being subjected to mock executions. The torture chamber at the aggregate plant is just one of 28 discovered after the liberation of Kharkiv Oblast. Most of those who conducted the illegal interrogations and tortured locals remain unknown. However, Ukrainian prosecutors have been able to identify several key individuals. The torture chamber was guarded by Zahar Zubkov, a defector from Luhansk, a Ukrainian city occupied by Russian forces in 2014.
Representatives of the so-called law enforcement agencies from Luhansk People's Republic ensured the functioning of this place of detention and carried out other instructions from the FSB, including the delivery of our people, residents of the Kharkiv region, to the territory of this plant, or overseeing the torture and other instructions that were given at that time.
The Ukrainian prosecutor's office also charged Sergei Shishkarov in absentia, a serviceman of the 71st Landing Ship Brigade of the Russian Baltic Fleet. According to Ukrainian investigators, he participated in the creation of occupation authorities in Vovchansk and persecuted locals who had pro-Ukrainian views. This included personally abusing civilians in the torture chamber at the aggregate plant. Ukrainian prosecutors also found that officers from the 5th Service of Russia's FSB were at the plant. Employees of this department have been involved in the occupation of Ukrainian territories since 2014. According to the Ukrainian prosecutor's office, FSB officer Andrei Kyrilkin personally participated in the kidnapping and torture of civilians at the Vovchansk plant.
First of all, we can say that the territory of the plant was under the FSB's control. It was a place where freedom was deprived, where the FSB created its torture chamber in order to obtain certain statements from our citizens or to punish them for certain actions.
Shortly before the liberation of Vovchansk by the armed forces of Ukraine, some of the prisoners were released. Others were transferred to a garage next to another building of the plant. Alexander and Valentin were among them.
19 of us were transferred to the garage. They said, "You will stay here for your own safety." Most likely, the safety was not for us, but for them, because they found a place for themselves nearby, in a one-story building. Of course, anywhere could end up being hit, but they saw this as a safe place for themselves, and they kept us in the garage. 19 people in a building with no light, no toilet, no water, nothing.
Most people were released in September 2022 when Ukrainian troops entered the city, but we know of at least one civilian hostage from the aggregate plant who has disappeared. After the liberation of Vovchansk by the armed forces of Ukraine, the Russian military repeatedly shelled the aggregate plant. In the spring of 2024, it was captured again by Russian troops. But within 6 months, Ukrainian special forces regained control of the plant. The latest footage from Vovchansk shows the torture chamber building is completely destroyed. Perhaps the Russians were trying to hide the traces of their own crimes.
We are able to publish videos like this for free thanks to the support of the people around the world, people like you. Consider joining our community and help us keep going. Become a member of the Kyiv Independent for just $5 a month. Thank you.